All right, ready to dive into a topic that's often kind of gets buried under a lot of hype.
Definitely.
Central American gangs,
Uh,
you've given us like a ton of material to work with,
Yeah.
like really gritty, on-the-ground stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Personal stories, people who are actually caught in the middle of all this.
Right.
We've even got like a glimpse inside these Mexican drug cartels, the notorious ones.
Wow.
And it seems like you really want to get past just the headlines, you want
Yeah.
to figure out what's really driving this whole thing.
Absolutely.
They're complex, right?
Yeah, definitely complex.
Yeah, so much going on.
And I think for me, the key is going to be like connecting the dots. We've
Okay.
got these individual stories,
Yeah,
but then we need to see how they fit into the bigger picture.
right.
The poverty, the corruption, the impact of U.S. policies, stuff people often miss.
Yeah,
Got to understand the why behind all this.
exactly.
And how it all ties into this migration crisis everyone's talking about.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And speaking of connecting the dots, like right away, one thing that really hit me was this story
Okay.
from inside Mexico's most powerful drug cartel
Oh, yeah.
about this 13-year-old kid working for the Sinaloa cartel,
Wow.
surrounded by just brutality, but his dream is to be a vet.
It's
Yeah,
it really makes you think, doesn't it?
it does. That clash between like his innocence and the reality he's living in
Totally.
is heavy stuff.
It makes you wonder how a kid that young even ends up in a situation like that.
Yeah, how do these gangs even get so powerful? Like, they control whole communities.
Right.
They're shaping these kids' lives.
It's crazy.
That's what I was hoping you could help us understand.
Well, a lot of the sources we have,
Yeah.
especially Mexico, fleeing Central American gang violence,
Mhm.
they trace it back to the 80s,
Okay.
specifically those mass deportations from the U.S. to Central America.
Right.
It's almost ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The U.S. trying to solve their gang problem.
Uh-huh.
But they ended up fueling a bigger one down there.
It's like they just shifted the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
So many of those deported, they're already involved in gangs in the U.S.
Right. They brought that whole culture with them, the
Yeah.
structures, the names, MS-13, 18th Street, all that.
So it wasn't like gangs were totally new to Central America,
No, not at all.
but this just poured gasoline on the fire.
Exactly.
These countries were already struggling with poverty and political instability.
And then you add this influx of gang members.
Yeah, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about a problem that's been brewing for decades then.
Yeah, a long time.
But it's not like these gangs have just stayed the same, right?
No, they've evolved. New approaches to Central America's gangs talks about this.
Okay.
They highlight how different groups have their own unique characteristics, motives.
Like what?
Well, for example, they say MS-13 is more sophisticated than the 18th Street gang.
Interesting.
And then you have new groups popping up, like the chili sauce gang in Honduras.
Chili sauce. That's a wild name.
Right, it just shows this isn't a static thing.
It's constantly changing. It's clear these gangs are dug in deep.
For sure.
But how do they hold on to that power?
Well,
One thing I see over and over in these sources,
yeah.
extortion,
Yeah.
it's like their lifeblood.
Yeah, it's how they control everything and make their money.
And it's not just small-time stuff, right?
No, it's systematic.
Like a whole system of exploitation.
Exactly.
I mean, new approaches to Central America's gangs has this statistic.
Yeah.
Half, 50% of people leaving the Northern Triangle,
Wow.
they're fleeing violence.
It's directly tied to the gangs.
It's like they have a stranglehold on these regions.
It's a terrible situation.
And the human cost, it's just devastating.
Tell me about it.
We're not just talking about numbers,
Right.
These are real people.
Like those bus drivers in Guatemala.
Over 500 killed just for refusing to pay.
It's horrifying.
And it's the same in El Salvador with transport workers.
And Honduras, over 100 taxi drivers a year.
It's a climate of fear, pure and simple.
It's like a twisted tax on anyone trying to make an honest living.
I know. It's chilling.
It is.
There's this quote from a Guatemalan ex-police officer
Oh, yeah.
in New Approaches to Central America's Gangs.
Uh-huh.
I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said,
Okay.
if the wealth doesn't spread to the poor areas,
Yeah.
then it's only logical you got to pay a tax to go between them.
Wow.
Powerful statement, right?
It really highlights how this isn't just about criminals.
It's deeper than that.
It's about these huge gaps between rich and poor.
The system is failing them.
Totally.
It's like the perfect breeding ground for gangs.
It is. They step in where the state fails.
But here's something I found surprising.
What's up?
That same source, New Approaches to Central America's Gangs,
Yeah.
it says that for all their power,
Right.
their extortion rackets are often super inefficient.
Really?
Individual members, they don't actually make that much money.
Huh. That's interesting.
It's almost like a paradox.
It is. It makes you question their motives.
Yeah, if it's not just about greed, then what is it about?
That's a good question. And could this inefficiency be a way to help?
What do you mean?
Maybe we could incentivize them to go legit.
You think so?
It's worth exploring, but to really understand that we need to go deeper.
Deeper into what?
The psychology, the social factors.
Okay.
Why do people join these gangs in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good place to pick up next time.
Definitely. So we've been looking at how gang violence in Central America, goes all the way back to the 80s.
Right, and those deportations from the U.S., like, really added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, and we've talked about how extortion is brutal.
It's how they control everything.
Yeah, it keeps everyone living in fear.
But now I kind of want to shift gears a little.
Okay.
And look inward.
Inward.
Yeah, like inside these gangs themselves.
Okay.
What makes them tick, you know?
Yeah.
What makes someone join one of these groups and stay?
Right.
Especially when we just said the money isn't even that good a lot of the time.
That's a really important question.
It is.
It gets to the core of this whole thing.
Right.
We can't just see these gangs as like one big blob with one goal.
Right, they're not all the same.
Exactly, and new approaches to Central America's gangs really emphasizes that.
Okay.
Like, they use this phrase, mafia of the poor.
Feel of the poor.
Yeah, it's strong language,
Nice.
but it makes you think,
Wow.
these gangs, they don't just exist in a bubble, you know?
They're part of the society.
Exactly, they're a product of it, in a way.
So you're saying we can't separate them from the poverty,
And the inequality,
the lack of opportunity.
the government not providing basic services.
Okay, so it's about more than just the gangs themselves.
Way more.
We need to look at the social and psychological factors, too.
Absolutely. Why do people join in the first place?
Right.
Remember that statistic, 70% of gang members, their families, make less than $250 a month?
It's hard to even imagine living on that.
It is.
So for a lot of these kids,
Yeah.
joining a gang, it's not about greed.
No.
It's not about being a bad person.
It's about survival.
It's the only way they see to escape poverty.
And to find somewhere they belong.
Right, it's twisted. But these gangs provide a sense of community,
They offer protection.
a sense of identity.
Even a messed up kind of respect,
Yeah, things they don't have anywhere else.
Especially in those environments.
And we can't forget about the violence itself.
No, that's a huge part of it.
Inside Mexico's most powerful drug cartel shows us how casual it is for them.
Casual.
They talk about killing like it's nothing.
It's chilling.
Like death is just a normal part of life.
Makes you wonder how anyone can get used to that.
It's like their whole sense of morality gets warped.
Yeah, violence becomes the norm.
It's even glorified.
In a way, it's all they know.
And that violence, it spills out.
Into the rest of society.
It creates chaos.
Fear, instability.
And that's where the role of the U.S. gets even more complicated.
How so?
Well, we talked about how deportations help these gangs grow.
Right.
But inside Mexico's most powerful drug cartel brings up something else.
What's that?
The U.S., we're the biggest consumers of the drugs these cartels produce.
So we're part of the problem, too.
It's like we can't pretend we're just innocent bystanders.
We're fueling the whole cycle.
It's a tangled mess.
It is. It's hard to separate cause and effect.
Exactly, which is why we need to understand all these different pieces.
If we want to find real solutions.
Solutions that actually work.
Not just Band-Aids.
Right, so with all that in mind,
Yeah.
what can we do?
Well, there are some promising approaches.
Like what?
Remember we talked about Guatemala's anti-extortion office?
Yeah, the one that helps small businesses?
Exactly. It's about creating opportunity.
So people have a real alternative to gang life.
And the reintegration programs for deportees.
Giving them a chance to build a new life.
Instead of falling back into the same patterns.
So those are two examples.
But we have to remember,
Right.
There's no magic bullet.
No one solution fits all.
Each situation is different.
Each gang has its own dynamics.
We need to tailor our responses.
Which is why sources like these are so important.
They help us see the details,
The nuances,
the motivations,
the things that make each situation unique.
and that deeper understanding, that's where we can start to build real change.
Change that lasts.
But to really dig into those solutions,
Yeah.
we'll need to move on to the final part of our deep dive.
Man, we've really been through it, haven't we?
We have,
The dark side of gang violence in Central America.
from the very beginning,
Those brutal extortion economies, how they just like fuel everything.
and all those forces at play,
Poverty, corruption, policies that just backfire.
It creates this perfect storm for these gangs.
And then trying to understand like what makes someone join
Right, what keeps them there?
when it's so dangerous and often the money's not even that good.
It's been a tough conversation.
Sure.
But we got to face this stuff head on.
If we want to make things better.
Exactly. No more sugarcoating.
And that's what I was hoping we could focus on now.
Okay.
Not just dwelling on the problems.
Right.
But like, what can we actually do about this?
Solutions, not just talk.
Real solutions, things that could actually make a difference.
Rounded in what's really happening.
Yeah, because it's easy to get lost in the big picture, right?
The statistics, the policy.
But this is about people's lives.
It is. Families being torn apart.
Communities living in terror.
Young people with no future.
So we got to start with empathy, right?
Absolutely. Understanding why this is happening.
You know that quote from the Guatemalan ex-police officer?
Which one?
from new approaches to Central America's gangs.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
He said if the wealth doesn't reach the poor parts of town,
Uh-huh.
it's only logical there's a tax to travel there.
It's like he's saying poverty creates this whole system.
That poverty and inequality are the root of the problem.
They're the breeding ground for gangs.
So we got to address that, right?
It's crucial. We can't just focus on cracking down.
Like the Iron Fist approach, that hasn't worked.
We need to give people a way out.
A real alternative to gang life.
That's where some of these ideas we've talked about come in.
Like Guatemala's anti-extortion office.
Supporting small businesses.
Giving people in those communities a
To
chance.
build something for themselves.
And those reintegration programs for deportees.
Helping them get back on their feet.
So they don't fall back into the same trap.
It's about breaking the cycle.
But what about those who are already in deep?
The ones who've been in gangs for years.
Is there any hope for them?
Well, New Approaches to Sexual America's Gangs talks about this thing.
Okay.
Non-face-to-face signaling.
What's that?
It's basically trying to open a dialogue.
With the gangs themselves?
Yeah, even if it's not direct.
That seems kind of risky.
I know, but the goal is to reduce the violence.
And maybe start addressing those deeper issues.
The poverty, the lack of opportunity.
It's a long shot.
It is, but we have to try something different.
Because what we're doing now, it's clearly not working.
The Iron Fist, it just creates more violence.
It pushes them further underground.
Makes the problem even worse.
So we need a whole new way of thinking.
We do. This isn't a simple problem.
And there's no simple solution.
We need to see the whole picture.
And understand how everything's connected.
That's where the real work starts.
Not just for governments and organizations.
But for each of us.
Because this isn't just a Central American problem.
It's a human problem.
We're all connected in some way.
Whether we realize it or not.
So as we wrap this up,
Yeah.
what's the one thing we want people to take away from this?
That this issue, it's complicated, it's deep-rooted,
There are no easy answers.
but it's not hopeless.
There are things we can do.
People are working hard to make a difference.
But we need to change how we think about this.
Move past those simple narratives.
Look at the nuances.
See the human side of things.
Because everyone deserves a chance, right?
We do. A chance at a better life.
So we've explored a lot here.
We have different perspectives, the complexity.
Hopefully we got people thinking.
But this is just the start.
Keep digging into those sources. Keep asking
More
questions.
importantly,
Ask yourself, what can I do?
how can I be part of the solution?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
See you next time.